A family sat down for Thanksgiving dinner. It was a time of catching up and enjoying each other's company. They never expected what was to come. It was Thanksgiving Day in 2009 in Jupiter, Florida. Family member Paul Merhige, a 35-year-old man with a long history of mental health struggles and festering grudges, had been invited to his cousin's house for Thanksgiving dinner. That day, the home of Jim and Muriel Sitton was filled with family who had gathered to celebrate. Among them were Paul's twin sisters, Carla Merhige and Lisa Knight, their 6-year-old cousin Michaela Sitton, and his aunt Raymond Joseph. Though Paul had been estranged from much of the family, he was welcomed for the holiday. The family tried to extend warmth and compassion to Paul despite his past troubles. They didn't know, however, that Paul had been planning revenge for those he viewed as wronged him. He had withdrawn a large sum of money and purchased 2 weapons in preparation for what he was about to do. As the evening continued, Paul sat silently, observing the joyous laughter and festivities around him. At around 10 p.m., as the family relaxed after dinner, Paul quietly left the gathering and went to his car. He retrieved one of the weapons he had hidden there, returned to the house, and unleashed a deadly rampage. Without any warning, Paul opened fire, shooting his family members one by one in a horrifying massacre. His first targets were his twin sisters, Carla Merhige and Lisa Knight. The 2 women, who had shared a lifelong bond, were killed instantly. Lisa, who was pregnant and eagerly awaiting the birth of her child, was shot in front of her husband, Patrick Knight. Patrick was severely injured and later fell into a coma, spending the next 3 months in recovery as he tried to rebuild a life shattered by this unimaginable tragedy. Paul then turned his weapon on his aunt, Raymond Joseph, killing her as she pleaded for her life. Finally, he did the unthinkable. Paul aimed his gun at 6-year-old Michaela Sitton, the youngest and most innocent of his family members. Michaela, who had been so joyful, had just finished performing a song for her family a few hours earlier. Paul took her life with cold calculation, a moment that would haunt her parents, Jim and Muriel Sitton, forever. The family's screams filled the house, but the event was over in minutes. As the gravity of what had just occurred began to sink in, Paul fled the scene, leaving behind a devastated family and a community gripped by shock and horror. The Jupiter Police Department responded quickly, but by the time they arrived, Paul Merhige was already gone, vanishing into the night. News of the tragedy spread quickly, making headlines nationwide. People were horrified by the details, struggling to understand how such a tragedy could unfold within the warmth of a family gathering. Law enforcement agencies launched an extensive manhunt for Paul Merhige, who was now one of the most wanted men in the country. Authorities released his photo to the public and urged people to come forward with any information. A $25,000 reward was posted, and the U.S. Marshals joined the search. For weeks, Paul managed to evade capture, leaving authorities baffled and the family fearing he might escape justice altogether. During this time, Jim and Muriel Sitton, Michaela's grieving parents, fought to keep their daughter's memory alive, while also grappling with the devastating loss of their family members. They couldn't fathom how someone so close to them could commit such an unspeakable act, and the trauma of losing their daughter in such a violent way left a wound that would never heal. The Sittons publicly called for justice and expressed their heartbreak to the media, turning their personal tragedy into a plea for capturing Paul before he could hurt anyone else. On January 2, 2010, after more than a month of evading authorities, Paul Merhige was finally captured. Acting on a tip from a viewer who had seen his face on America's Most Wanted, law enforcement found him hiding in a motel in the Florida Keys. He had been living under an assumed name, staying under the radar, and trying to start a new life, as if he hadn't committed one of the most shocking family massacres in recent memory. But while his capture ended the hunt, the pain and trauma of his actions remained. When he was brought to court, Paul pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. In October 2011, he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was packed with family members, many of whom were still grappling with the grief and loss he had inflicted. The Sittons and the rest of the family could finally see justice served, but the wound was still raw. In a heartbreaking twist, Jim and Muriel Sitton filed a lawsuit in 2011 against Paul's parents, Michael and Carol Merhige, accusing them of negligence. They argued that the Merhiges could have prevented the massacre, knowing Paul's violent tendencies and mental health struggles. The case went to court, but in 2014, the 4th District Court of Appeal ruled in favor of the Merhige family, stating they were not responsible for the actions of their adult son. For Jim and Muriel, the verdict was another painful reminder of the devastating impact Paul's actions had on their lives, leaving them with little closure. Paul Merhige's actions forced many families to confront the uncomfortable reality of mental health struggles and unresolved family conflicts. His story serves as a tragic reminder of how unchecked anger and hidden mental health issues can erupt in catastrophic ways. Watch these videos next for more tragic tales.